The nurse who refused to examine Evelyn Monroe did not know the woman clutching her stomach under the emergency room lights had just signed the largest donation in Street Catherine Medical Center's history. She did not know that the rain-soaked coat, worn shoes, and frayed canvas bag belonged to the billionaire whose foundation was about to give the hospital $300 million. She did not know that by morning, the celebration stage prepared for that gift would become the place where her career began to collapse. Nurse Patricia Cole only saw what she wanted to see: a poor black woman with no obvious money, no polished appearance, and no visible proof that she deserved urgency. In Patricia's world, pain came second. Insurance came first. Evelyn Monroe stepped through the sliding glass doors at 9:17 on a stormy Thursday night, one hand pressed against the right side of her abdomen, the other gripping the strap of her old bag. The emergency room smelled of antiseptic, wet coats, cold coffee, and fear. Patients waited beneath harsh white lights, some bleeding, some coughing, some simply staring at the floor because pain had worn out their voices. Evelyn stopped just inside the entrance and studied the room. She had funded hospitals, built clinics, and negotiated with executives who praised compassion while quietly counting profit. But none of those meetings could tell her what this hospital truly was. Only the waiting room could. That was why she had come alone, without a driver, without security, without the tailored suit that usually made people stand straighter before she said a word. Tomorrow morning, Street Catherine was supposed to announce the Monroe Hope Center, a cancer treatment wing for patients who had been priced out of mercy. Tonight, Evelyn wanted to know whether the hospital deserved to carry her mother's name. Ruth Monroe had died years earlier after waiting too long in an emergency room because her insurance card raised more concern than her symptoms. That memory became Evelyn's wound, then her promise, then her empire. Now she stood in another emergency room, dressed like someone people overlooked, waiting to see what Street Catherine would reveal when it believed no one important was watching. At the reception desk, a young intern nurse with tired eyes and a badge reading Maya Bennett looked up from a stack of forms. "Good evening, ma'am. What brings you in tonight?" Evelyn leaned slightly against the counter, breathing through a wave of pain. It was not entirely pretend. Her private physician had warned her that the recurring pain in her abdomen should not be ignored. "Severe abdominal pain," she said. "It started this afternoon. It is getting worse." Maya's expression sharpened. She reached for a blood pressure cuff. "All right, let us get your vitals first. Are you dizzy, nauseated, or having trouble standing?" "A little dizzy," Evelyn answered. "Mostly pain." Maya stepped around the desk, but a voice cut across the space. "Maya, stop!" Nurse Patricia Cole emerged from behind the intake station like a gate closing. She was in her early 50s, tall, polished, and stiff-backed, with silver blonde hair pinned tightly and a navy scrub jacket that seemed as severe as armor. Her badge read Charge Nurse. Her eyes traveled over Evelyn with quick practiced judgment, from the wet shoes to the old bag to the plain scarf at her neck. "Has she been registered?" Patricia asked. Maya hesitated. "Not yet. She is reporting severe abdominal pain, so I was going to take vitals first." Patricia looked at Evelyn again, slower this time, as if poverty itself were a symptom. "Insurance card and identification," she said. Evelyn met her eyes. "I would like to be seen by a doctor." Patricia's mouth tightened. "That is not how this works. In an emergency department, medical screening comes before billing, does it not?" A few people in the waiting room looked up. Patricia heard the question for what it was, not confusion, but challenge. "Everyone here wants to be seen," she said. "Everyone believes their situation is urgent. We still have procedures." Evelyn reached into her bag and took out her identification, but not the black metal insurance card that would have changed Patricia's tone instantly. She placed only the ID on the counter. Patricia glanced at it. "Evelyn Monroe." She said the name with no recognition. "Insurance?" "I need a medical evaluation first." Patricia exhaled sharply. "Do you have insurance, Miss Monroe?" "I asked to be evaluated. And I asked whether you can pay for care." Maya spoke quietly. "Nurse Cole, I can take her vitals. It will only take a minute." Patricia turned toward her with a look that made the younger nurse shrink. "Compassion does not replace protocol. But abdominal pain can be serious. So can wasting emergency resources on people who refuse basic intake." The words were not shouted. but they carried. Evelyn felt the familiar heat of public shame rise in the room, the heat created when strangers are invited to decide whether someone is deserving. She had been born into that kind of room long before she had enough money to escape it. Now she stood inside it by choice, and the insult revealed everything. Patricia slid the identification back across the counter with 2 fingers. If you do not provide insurance or payment information, you will wait until we determine whether you can be processed. Processed, Evelyn repeated softly. Not treated. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Do not twist my words. I am only listening to them. A security guard near the entrance glanced over, alerted by Patricia's posture more than Evelyn's voice. Maya stepped closer to the desk. Ma'am, please sit down. I will find a wheelchair. Patricia snapped, Maya. The young nurse froze. Patricia lowered her voice, but Evelyn still heard every word. You are here to learn, not to rescue every walk in who comes through those doors with a sad story and no paperwork. This is Street Catherine, not a shelter. The sentence landed like a slap. Evelyn looked past Patricia to the framed poster on the wall behind the desk. Street Catherine Medical Center, compassion without exception. Is that the official policy? Evelyn asked. Patricia looked annoyed. The official policy is that patients cooperate with intake. And if they are too sick to cooperate, you are standing and speaking clearly. That does not mean I am safe. Patricia leaned forward. If you cannot pay, you wait like everyone else. The waiting room went silent. Evelyn looked at Maya, whose face had gone pale. The young nurse's hand still hovered near the blood pressure cuff. She wanted to help. She was afraid. Both things were true, and Evelyn saw the cost of fear in real time. Patricia pointed toward the plastic chairs. Sit down or leave. Those are your choices. Evelyn picked up her identification and slipped it back into her bag. She did not reveal the foundation. She did not say that her money would have built a wing for people Patricia had just dismissed. Instead, she took one careful breath and said, Then I suppose tomorrow will tell us what this hospital truly costs. Patricia gave a short, humorless laugh. Tomorrow will not change intake policy, Miss Monroe. Evelyn looked once more at the poster, promising compassion. Then at Maya, who whispered, I am sorry, so softly that only Evelyn heard it. Outside, rain beat against the glass doors like fingers demanding entry. Evelyn turned from the desk and walked toward the waiting area. Not defeated, not finished, but listening. Behind her, Patricia returned to her station, certain she had protected the hospital from another unpaid burden. She did not know that Evelyn Monroe had already learned what she came to learn. She did not know that the most dangerous patient in the room was the quiet woman in the old coat who had just watched a hospital ask for proof of payment before proof of pain. Evelyn Monroe took a seat beneath the flickering television mounted high in the corner of the emergency waiting room, but she did not relax into the chair. She sat with her back straight, one hand still pressed against the ache in her abdomen, the other resting lightly on the strap of her old canvas bag. Around her, the room moved in weary fragments. A father bounced a feverish child against his shoulder. An elderly man coughed into a paper mask while his wife rubbed circles over his back. A teenage boy held a towel against his bleeding eyebrow. A pregnant woman closed her eyes and breathed through pain while her partner stared helplessly at the intake desk. This was the place where polished mission statements came to die or become real. Evelyn watched Patricia Cole return to the charge nurse station with the satisfied stiffness of someone who believed she had restored order. To Patricia, Evelyn was no longer a patient. She was a problem placed in a plastic chair. Maya Bennett remained near the counter, visibly unsettled, pretending to organize forms while her eyes kept drifting toward Evelyn. Patricia noticed every glance. Maya, she said sharply, triage room 2 needs restocking, and I do not mean 10 minutes from now. Maya looked as if she wanted to argue, but the fear of losing her internship closed over her face. Yes, Nurse Cole. She walked away, but not before Evelyn caught the apology in her eyes. Evelyn gave the smallest nod, not encouragement exactly, but recognition. Sometimes the first step toward courage was simply knowing that someone had seen your hesitation and had not mistaken it for indifference. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Evelyn's pain pulsed harder. Real enough now that she had to steady her breathing. She could have ended the test at any moment. One phone call would bring her private physician, her security team, and half the hospital leadership running down those sterile halls. One sentence would change Patricia's voice from suspicion to panic, but that was precisely why Evelyn did not speak. Power revealed nothing when announced too early. She wanted to see the system as her mother would have faced it, without title, without wealth, without anyone afraid of consequences. When she rose slowly and approached the desk again, Patricia looked up before Evelyn reached the counter. "Miss Monroe, sitting down means waiting," she said. "Standing up every few minutes will not move you ahead." Evelyn placed one hand on the counter to support herself. "The pain is getting worse. I would like my vitals taken." Patricia folded her arms. "And I would like patients to follow intake procedure. You have not given me medical screening. You have not given us insurance." Evelyn's voice remained low. "Are you refusing to evaluate me because I have not provided payment information?" A woman nearby turned her head. A man with a phone lowered it from his ear. Patricia's expression hardened as she realized the question had an audience. "I am refusing to reward disruptive behavior," she said. "You came in here making demands, challenging staff, and interfering with emergency workflow. I came in with abdominal pain. You came in without cooperation." Evelyn looked toward the triage hallway. "Where's the attending physician?" Patricia laughed once, not loudly but enough to humiliate. "You do not get to summon doctors because you know a few medical words." A security guard shifted closer to the desk. He was young, broad-shouldered, and uncomfortable, the kind of man who had not yet learned whether obedience and judgment could exist in the same uniform. Patricia glanced at him, then back at Evelyn. "We have people waiting who completed their paperwork properly. You are not special." Evelyn felt the sentence settle over the room. "You are not special." It was meant to cut her down, but it only confirmed what she already knew. The hospital did not need to know she was special. It needed to treat her as human. Maya returned from the hallway carrying a tray of supplies. She stopped when she saw security near the desk. "Nurse Cole," she said carefully. "I can take her blood pressure right now. It will not affect the queue." Patricia turned her head slowly. "Did I ask for your opinion?" "No, but she says the pain is worsening. And you believe every story you hear?" Maya's hands tightened around the tray. "I believe pain should be assessed." The waiting room went very still. Patricia stepped closer to Maya, lowering her voice only slightly. "You are an intern. Your evaluation is not needed unless I request it. Your program director will be very interested to hear that you cannot follow chain of command." Maya's face drained of color. Evelyn watched the struggle cross the young woman's features, the desire to help battling the threat of losing the future she had worked for. Patricia took the tray from her hands and set it sharply on the counter. "Go chart the discharges from bed 7 and bed 11, now." Maya did not move. Patricia's voice became ice. "Do you want to finish this rotation?" That did it. Maya stepped back, eyes wet with anger she could not use. "No, ma'am," she whispered. "Then move." Maya walked away, and Patricia turned to Evelyn with the expression of someone who had won. "Do you see what you are causing? Staff disruption, delayed care, emotional scenes. This is why we have process." Evelyn looked at her with a calm that seemed to irritate Patricia more than shouting would have. "You are mistaking control for care." Patricia leaned forward. "And you are mistaking this hospital for a charity clinic." Several heads lifted. A murmur moved through the room. Someone near the vending machine began recording with a phone held low against his chest. Patricia noticed but did not stop. Pride had taken the wheel now. "Let me make this simple," she continued. "If you have a medical emergency, cooperate with intake. If you want warmth, coffee, and sympathy, there are shelters 3 blocks south. We cannot turn this emergency department into a waiting room for every person who walks in from the rain." Evelyn's hand closed around the edge of the counter, not because of the insult, but because the pain flashed again, sharper this time. The security guard noticed. His expression changed. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Patricia cut him off. "Do not engage unless I ask you to." Evelyn looked at him. "I need medical screening." He glanced at Patricia, trapped between instinct and authority. Patricia pointed toward the doors. "What you need is to stop making a scene. I am not making a scene. You are refusing procedure and alarming other patients. Other patients are alarmed because you are humiliating me. The words were clear, direct, and too true. Patricia's face tightened with anger. Security, she said. The young guard straightened. Nurse Cole? Escort, miss? Monroe away from the intake desk. She can sit down quietly, or she can leave the property. Evelyn did not move as he stepped closer. He lowered his voice. Ma'am, please, I do not want this to become difficult. It is already difficult, Evelyn said. Just not for the person making it so. The guard looked ashamed, but he still gestured toward the chairs. Evelyn stepped back from the counter slowly. Around her, strangers watched with the heavy silence of people relieved not to be the target. Patricia gathered Evelyn's loose intake form, tore it once across the middle, and dropped it into a secure bin. The gesture was small. It was also final. Maya appeared at the edge of the hallway just in time to see it. Nurse Cole, please, she said, no longer hiding the tremor in her voice. She needs help. Patricia turned on her. One more word, Maya, and I will personally recommend your removal from this program. Evelyn looked at Maya before the younger woman could answer. Do not lose yourself for me, she said quietly. Just remember what happened. Maya's eyes widened, as if the words had given her a task she did not yet understand. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her bag, turned from the desk, and walked toward the sliding glass doors. No one stopped her? No doctor came? No supervisor appeared. The security guard followed at a distance until she crossed the threshold into the cold rain. Outside, the night swallowed the warmth of the building in seconds. Water struck Evelyn's face, ran down her collar, and soaked through the edges of her coat. She stood beneath the glowing hospital sign and looked back through the glass. Patricia was already speaking to another patient as if nothing had happened. The machine had resumed. That, more than the insult, made Evelyn's chest tighten. A black car waited near the curb, half hidden beneath the rain. Her driver, Samuel, rushed forward with an umbrella, his face filled with alarm. Miss Monroe, what happened? Evelyn did not answer until she was inside the car with the door closed and the hospital lights blurred behind the wet window. She took out her phone, opened the recording app, saved the file, and sent it to Marcus Bell, her attorney, and Alana Price, executive director of the Monroe Foundation. Then she placed a call. Alana answered immediately. Evelyn, are you all right? Evelyn looked at the emergency entrance where a woman in pain could be weighed against paperwork and found inconvenient. Freeze the donation, she said. There was a pause. All 300 million? All of it. Notify Street Catherine that tomorrow's announcement is suspended pending ethics review. I want preservation notices sent tonight for every security camera, every intake log, every complaint file, and every staff communication involving Nurse Patricia Cole. Alana's voice sharpened. What did they do? Evelyn leaned back against the seat, still feeling the pain beneath her ribs, but something colder had settled over it now. They were about to receive $300 million to save lives, she said. Tonight, they refused to save one. For nearly a full minute after Evelyn Monroe stepped out into the rain, Maya Bennett stood at the edge of the emergency hallway with her hands frozen at her sides, listening to the sliding glass doors close behind a woman who had asked for help and received suspicion instead. The emergency room returned to motion almost immediately, because hospitals were very good at pretending interruption was the same thing as resolution. A monitor beeped somewhere behind the nurse's station. A child cried near the vending machines. Patricia Cole picked up a clipboard, spoke to a patient in a brisk professional voice, and moved on as though tearing Evelyn's intake form in half had been nothing more than correcting a filing mistake. Maya wanted to believe there was still time to fix it. She wanted to run outside, bring Evelyn back in, take her vitals herself, and deal with Patricia later. But the security guard had already returned to his post. The rain beyond the glass had swallowed Evelyn's shape, and Patricia was now watching Maya with the careful patience of someone waiting for one more mistake. Bet 11's discharge notes, Patricia said without looking up. Now Maya. Maya nodded and walked back down the hallway, but the words on the charts blurred in front of her. Severe abdominal pain. No screening. No vitals. No physician notified. Patient removed from intake area. The phrases repeated in her mind with the dull force of a warning alarm nobody else could hear. She had entered nursing because her grandmother used to say that the first job of a healer was to believe pain before judging the person carrying it. Patricia had taught the opposite in one night. Maya finished the discharge notes with trembling hands, then returned to the intake computer while Patricia was speaking to a paramedic near Ambulance Bay 2. The torn paper form was gone, but the electronic search field still held the last name Monroe. Maya stared at it. She knew she should not open anything without instruction. She also knew that following instruction had just sent a patient into the rain. She typed Evelyn Monroe carefully and pressed enter. The system pulled up a temporary intake record, incomplete but not erased. Name: Evelyn Monroe. Age: 42. Complaint: severe abdominal pain. Status: pending. Intake stopped before medical screening. Maya's throat tightened. She clicked the insurance field and saw nothing. Then, just above the demographics section, a small alert appeared in red letters. Restricted administrative flag. Maya frowned. Emergency walk-ins did not have restricted administrative flags. VIPs sometimes did. Donors sometimes did. Board members sometimes did. She glanced toward Patricia, then clicked the flag. Access denied. The system asked for executive clearance. Maya's pulse quickened. She minimized the window and opened the internal announcement board, the one employees rarely read unless a supervisor forced them to. The first post showed tomorrow morning's event schedule. Monroe Hope Center donation announcement 10:00 a.m. Main atrium. Attendance mandatory for department heads. The second post mentioned the Monroe Foundation. Maya had seen the name all week on banners being delivered, on floral arrangements arriving through the service entrance, on the whispered excitement of administrators who talked about $300 million, as if money itself had become a patient waiting to be celebrated. She had not paid attention to the donor's first name. Now she searched the announcement. A locked executive attachment appeared, but the preview line was visible. Dr. Evelyn Monroe, founder and chair of the Monroe Foundation, will be honored for the largest philanthropic gift in the hospital's history. Maya stopped breathing. She opened a browser on the staff computer and typed Evelyn Monroe, Monroe Foundation. The images loaded before the articles did. There she was, not in the wet coat and old shoes, but on a stage beside a medical research team, wearing a tailored black suit, her curls swept back, her expression calm and unmistakable. Another photo showed her shaking hands with a senator. Another showed her standing in front of a mobile clinic for uninsured cancer patients. Founder, billionaire philanthropist, healthcare equity advocate, daughter of Ruth Monroe, whose death after delayed emergency treatment had inspired the foundation's work. Maya covered her mouth with both hands. The woman Patricia had called disruptive was the woman whose money was supposed to build the hospital's future. Worse than that, she was the woman whose entire mission existed because hospitals had failed people who looked inconvenient to them. Maya looked across the emergency room. Patricia was laughing softly with an attending physician, one hand on her hip, perfectly comfortable beneath the fluorescent lights. Maya felt something inside her shift from fear to clarity. She could not undo what had happened, but she could refuse to let the hospital pretend it had not happened. She returned to the intake record and printed it. Then she opened the security access portal used for incident documentation. As an intern, she should not have had broad authority, but the emergency department allowed staff to attach short clips to safety reports when a patient dispute involved security. She selected the time window from 9:15 to 9:45 p.m. Camera 1 at the intake desk, Camera 3 facing the waiting area, and Camera 6 near the sliding doors. The export bar moved painfully slowly. Every few seconds she looked over her shoulder, certain Patricia would appear and end her rotation on the spot. When the file completed, Maya saved it under a neutral name, ER Intake Incident Monroe. Her hands shook as she opened a blank report. At approximately 9:17 p.m., patient Evelyn Monroe entered the emergency department reporting severe abdominal pain and dizziness. Charge nurse Patricia Cole requested insurance information before allowing medical screening. Patient asked for evaluation. Intern nurse Maya Bennett attempted to take vitals and was instructed not to proceed. Patient's condition was not assessed. Security was called near intake desk. Patient left property after being told to sit down quietly or leave. Maya paused, then added the line that made her stomach twist. The patient appears to be Dr. Evelyn Monroe of the Monroe Foundation, scheduled donor for tomorrow's announcement. She attached the intake record, the internal announcement preview, and the security clips. Sending it to Patricia would bury it. Sending it to the emergency department supervisor might do the same. So Maya searched the directory and added hospital legal, senior human resources, CEO Richard Lawson's office, compliance, and the Monroe Foundation liaison listed for tomorrow's ceremony. Her finger hovered over send for several seconds. She imagined Patricia reading it. She imagined being told she had violated chain of command. She imagined losing the career she had spent years chasing. Then she saw Evelyn's face again, calm in the rain, saying, "Just remember what happened." Maya pressed send. Across the city, Evelyn sat in the back office of the Monroe Foundation's Chicago headquarters, still wearing the damp coat from the emergency room. A private doctor had already examined her and ordered additional tests, confirming that while her condition required care, it was stable for the moment. That should have relieved her. But Evelyn's attention was not on her own body anymore. It was on the hospital. Alana Price stood at the conference table with a tablet, reading updates from legal. Marcus Bell had already sent preservation notices to Street Catherine, warning that all camera footage, intake logs, internal communications, and complaint files related to Evelyn's visit must be retained. The donation agreement, scheduled for public celebration in less than 12 hours, had been frozen. "They are going to panic," Marcus said. "Good," Evelyn replied. Her voice was quiet, not cruel, but final. Panic sometimes reaches places compassion does not. Alana looked up as a new email arrived. "We have an incident report from an intern nurse, Maya Bennett." Evelyn's eyes shifted. "Open it." The security footage appeared on the main screen. Evelyn watched herself enter. She watched Maya reach for the blood pressure cuff. She watched Patricia stop her. She watched the argument unfold with the strange distance of someone seeing her own humiliation from above. The camera showed more than memory had, the waiting room turning toward her, the security guard's discomfort, Maya's repeated attempts to intervene, Patricia tearing the intake form. Marcus said nothing until the footage ended. Alana's face was pale with anger. Evelyn looked at the email header again. "She sent this before sunrise?" "Yes," Alana said. "To legal, HR, compliance, the CEO's office, and us." Evelyn sat back slowly. That young nurse may have saved them from a cover-up. "And herself from silence," Marcus added. At 4:06 a.m., Richard Lawson, CEO of Street Catherine Medical Center, woke to his phone ringing non-stop on his nightstand. By 4:18, he was seated in his home office, watching the same footage Maya had sent. By 4:23, his face had gone gray. His wife appeared in the doorway and asked what was wrong. Richard did not answer at first. He replayed the part where Patricia said the hospital was not a shelter. Then he looked at the announcement folder on his desk, the one celebrating the Monroe Hope Center, and understood that the hospital had not merely offended a donor. It had exposed the exact cruelty her donation was meant to fight. He whispered, "We just threw out the woman who was going to save this hospital." By 7 o'clock that morning, Street Catherine Medical Center looked ready for celebration, not judgment. The main atrium had been transformed overnight into a stage for gratitude, ambition, and public applause. Tall white banners hung from the second-floor balcony, each one printed with the words Monroe Hope Center, expanding care, restoring lives. A polished podium stood beneath a wall of glass where winter light poured over rows of chairs reserved for board members, department heads, city officials, donors, reporters, and carefully selected patients whose stories had been approved by the communications team. White flowers lined the front of the stage. A string quartet rehearsed softly near the entrance. Catering staff arranged silver trays of coffee, fruit, and pastries near a table covered in blue linen. Every detail suggested that Street Catherine was about to become the hero of its own story. But behind the executive conference room doors on the 12th floor, the hospital's leaders sat in a silence so heavy that even the air conditioning seemed too loud. Richard Lawson had arrived before dawn, wearing the same shirt he had slept in under a hastily chosen suit jacket. Around him sat the chief medical officer, the head of nursing, the legal director, 3 board members, the communications chief, and Alana Price from the Monroe Foundation, whose expression made it clear that the foundation was no longer attending as a partner. Patricia Cole stood near the far end of the table, arms folded, face pale but stubborn, still trying to arrange the facts into a shape that did not condemn her. Maya Bennett sat near the door, small in the oversized chair, her badge clipped crookedly to her scrub top, her eyes fixed on her hands. She had been called in at 5:30 a.m. by hospital compliance and told not to speak with anyone until the meeting began. Patricia had passed her in the hallway without a word, but the look she gave Maya promised consequences if the world somehow failed to deliver them first. Richard touched the remote, and the screen at the front of the room lit up with the security footage Maya had preserved. "We are going to watch the full sequence," he said, his voice rough. "No summaries, no interpretations, just what happened." Patricia straightened. "Richard, before we proceed, I would like to say that this incident is being taken wildly out of context." The legal director looked at her. "You will have a chance to respond after the footage." "I was protecting intake order," Patricia said. "That emergency room was full. We cannot allow anyone who walks in demanding special treatment to disrupt the process." Alana Price turned her head slowly. She was asking for medical screening. Patricia's mouth tightened. She was refusing to provide insurance. The room went colder. Richard pressed play. The footage began with Evelyn Monroe entering through the sliding doors, rein on her shoulders, one hand pressed against her side. The camera angle was unforgiving in its clarity. It showed Maya greeting her. It showed Patricia stopping the blood pressure cuff before it touched Evelyn's arm. It showed the first demand for insurance, the first refusal to screen, the first moment when care stepped aside and judgment took its place. No one spoke as the video continued. Patricia's own voice filled the room, crisp and unmistakable. "This is Street Catherine, not a shelter." Maya flinched as if hearing it again hurt more than she expected. The chief medical officer lowered his eyes. One board member whispered something under his breath that might have been a prayer or a curse. The footage moved to the waiting room camera, where Evelyn stood at the intake desk with visible pain in her posture while Patricia folded her arms like a locked gate. Then came Maya's attempt to intervene. Then the threat about her rotation. Then security stepping closer. Then Patricia tearing the intake form and dropping it away as if the patient herself had been erased. Richard stopped the video on the final frame, Evelyn exiting into the rain while Patricia turned back to the desk. The room remained silent for several seconds after the screen froze. Patricia lifted her chin. "I did not know who she was." Alana leaned forward. "That sentence has come up several times already this morning. I want everyone in this room to understand that it is not a defense. It is the indictment." Patricia blinked. "Excuse me? If Dr. Monroe had been wearing a donor badge, you would have treated her differently. If she had arrived in a private ambulance with foundation staff, you would have treated her differently. If her insurance had been presented before her pain, you would have treated her differently. That means your standard of care was not based on need. It was based on perceived worth." Patricia's face flushed. "I have spent 30 years in emergency medicine. I know when someone is trying to manipulate the system." Maya looked up then, and something in her expression changed from fear to disbelief. Richard noticed it. "Maya," he said gently, "you may speak." Patricia turned sharply. "She is an intern. She does not understand the pressure of triage." Maya's voice came out quiet, but it did not break. "I understand that triage starts with assessing the patient. I understand that severe abdominal pain should be screened. I understand that I was stopped before I could take her blood pressure. I understand that Nurse Cole threatened my program because I tried to do the first thing I was trained to do." Patricia stared at her as if betrayal itself had put on scrubs. Before she could answer, the conference room door opened. Every head turned. Evelyn Monroe walked in wearing a black suit, her hair pulled back, her face calm and unreadable. Marcus Bell entered beside her, carrying a thin folder. The room rose almost as one, not from courtesy alone, but from shock, recognition, and the instinctive fear that comes when power finally has a face. Patricia did not stand at first. Then she seemed to realize she was the only one still seated and pushed herself awkwardly to her feet. Evelyn looked around the room, then at the frozen image of herself leaving the emergency department. Her eyes lingered there for only a moment before returning to Patricia. Please sit, she said. No one moved until she did. Evelyn took the empty chair at the head of the table, not because anyone offered it, but because the room had already surrendered it. Richard began. Dr. Monroe, on behalf of Street Catherine Medical Center, I want to express our deepest apology for what occurred last night. Evelyn raised one hand, and he stopped. I did not come here for a performance of regret, she said. I came here to determine whether this hospital understands what it did. Patricia swallowed. Dr. Monroe, I am truly sorry. If I had known you were the donor, I would never have. That, Evelyn said, turning fully toward her, is exactly why you should never have been trusted with patients. Patricia's mouth remained open, but no sound came. Evelyn's voice stayed even. You are not sorry you refused care to a woman in pain. You are sorry that the woman in pain had enough power to make you answer for it. That distinction matters. The communications chief's phone vibrated repeatedly on the table. She glanced down and went pale. Richard saw it. What is it? She hesitated. The announcement suspension has leaked. A short clip from the emergency room is online. Reporters downstairs are asking whether the Monroe Foundation has pulled the donation. Almost immediately, other phones began to buzz around the table. The story was moving beyond their control, leaving the conference room and entering the atrium below, where guests had arrived expecting speeches and now found themselves refreshing headlines. Street Catherine refuses care to billionaire donor. $300 million gift frozen after ER incident. Poor woman turned away was hospital's biggest benefactor. Evelyn did not look surprised. She opened the folder Marcus placed before her and slid a single page toward Richard. Effective immediately, the public announcement is canceled. The Monroe Foundation is freezing all $300 million pending an independent ethics investigation. Nurse Patricia Cole is to be removed from patient-facing authority during the review. All emergency intake protocols will be audited. All complaints involving delayed screening, insurance-based neglect, racial bias, and retaliation against staff will be reopened for the past 5 years. Richard read the page, his hand trembling slightly. Patricia gripped the arms of her chair. You cannot destroy a hospital over one night. Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. One night did not destroy this hospital. One night revealed it. Downstairs, the string quartet stopped playing. The press table became a crowd of raised phones and urgent questions. The banners for the Monroe Hope Center hung above the atrium like a promise the hospital had not yet earned. Evelyn stood, and the room stood with her. Last night, she said, I did not come here to test your equipment. I came to test your humanity. Your machines may be modern. Your lobby may be beautiful. Your doctors may be brilliant. But a hospital that asks for payment before mercy has forgotten why people walk through its doors. Her eyes moved to Maya, and her expression softened for the first time. Miss Bennett, please remain after this meeting. I would like to speak with you. Maya nodded, too overwhelmed to answer. Patricia stared at the table, finally understanding that the woman she had sent into the rain had returned not as a patient, but as the reckoning Street Catherine had invited upon itself. By noon, Street Catherine Medical Center was no longer preparing to announce the Monroe Hope Center. It was trying to survive the truth behind it. The white banners still hung across the main atrium, but now they looked less like symbols of hope and more like accusations printed in expensive ink. Reporters gathered beneath them with cameras raised, asking questions no communications director could answer cleanly. Patients in the waiting areas watched the news on their phones and then looked toward the emergency department with new suspicion. Staff members moved through the halls in tense silence, because everyone understood that the story had become bigger than Patricia Cole, bigger than one night, bigger than one woman in a wet coat. The world had seen enough of the video to understand the cruelty, but Evelyn Monroe had seen enough of the hospital's files to understand the pattern. Sitting in a temporary conference room 2 floors above the atrium, she reviewed the first report from the independent audit team while Alana Price stood beside the window, taking notes with controlled fury. Marcus Bell moved through legal calls in a low voice, making certain Street Catherine preserved every document it might later wish had disappeared. The early numbers were ugly. In the past 5 years, Street Catherine had received more than 80 formal complaints involving emergency intake delays, insurance first questioning, staff retaliation, or patients being discouraged from seeking treatment because they appeared unable to pay. Some complaints had been dismissed as misunderstandings. Some had been marked resolved without patient follow-up. Some had simply been moved between departments until they became too old to embarrass anyone. Evelyn read them one by one. A construction worker with chest pain told to update billing before evaluation. An elderly immigrant woman left waiting for hours because her daughter could not translate insurance documents quickly enough. A single mother whose child had a fever was warned about unpaid balances before anyone checked the child's temperature. A homeless veteran removed by security after repeatedly asking for help with abdominal pain. Each case had a name. Each name had a body. Each body had trusted a hospital to see pain before paperwork. This was never one nurse, Evelyn said at last. Her voice was quiet, but everyone in the room stopped moving. Patricia became possible because the hospital rewarded the behavior that looked efficient on spreadsheets. Alana nodded. Fast intake numbers for insured patients, high collection compliance, reduced uncompensated care exposure. Leadership praised the wrong metrics. Evelyn closed the file. Then leadership answers for them. Downstairs, Richard Lawson stood before a cluster of reporters and tried to say enough without saying too much. His statement had been rewritten 7 times by legal, then rejected by Evelyn for sounding like the hospital was apologizing for bad optics rather than harm. When he finally spoke, his face carried the strain of a man who knew every sentence would be judged by people angrier than his board. Last night, Street? Catherine Medical Center failed a patient who came to us in pain, he said. That failure was unacceptable. The Monroe Foundation has frozen its donation pending investigation, and we are cooperating fully. We will not describe this as an isolated misunderstanding until the evidence proves it. At this moment, the evidence suggests we must look deeper. The phrase "look deeper" became the headline within the hour. Former patients began posting stories online. Some had no connection to Evelyn, no reason to protect her, no financial interest in the donation, only old anger that had finally found daylight. A woman wrote that her father's stroke symptoms had been questioned because he arrived in work clothes and spoke little English. A man said his wife had been asked about payment while miscarrying in a bathroom. A nurse from another department anonymously claimed staff were trained to identify financial risk patients before triage was complete. Each account added weight to what Patricia had revealed. The hospital had not forgotten compassion in one moment. It had slowly trained itself to treat mercy as a cost center. Patricia Cole spent the afternoon in a small administrative office under suspension, her access badge disabled for patient areas, her phone ringing with calls she had been told not to answer. She had expected anger. She had not expected abandonment. Colleagues who once praised her as disciplined now avoided her name. Administrators who had leaned on her to keep the emergency department financially clean now spoke as if she had invented the culture alone. By 3 o'clock, her attorney had arrived, and by 4, Patricia requested a private meeting with Evelyn. Marcus advised against it. Alana said Patricia wanted to perform regret before consequence became permanent. Evelyn listened, then agreed to 10 minutes, with the recorder on the table, and no promise that anything said would change the investigation. Patricia entered the conference room without the posture that had made her seem powerful the night before. Her navy scrub jacket was gone, replaced by a gray blazer that did not fit the moment. She looked older under daylight, not softer, just stripped of authority. Evelyn sat across from her, hands folded, expression unreadable. Patricia began with the apology she had likely rehearsed with counsel. She said she deeply regretted the interaction. She said emergency departments were high-pressure environments. She said staff were overwhelmed, policies were unclear, and financial screening expectations came from above. She said she never intended harm. Evelyn let her finish. Then Patricia reached for the sentence Evelyn already knew was coming. Dr. Monroe, if I had known who you were, I would never have spoken to you that way. Evelyn's eyes did not move. That is the part you still do not understand. Patricia swallowed. I meant that I respect what you have done for healthcare. No, Evelyn said. You meant you respect power when you can identify it. You respect wealth when it is properly dressed. You respect a donor when she arrives with a press release. But a patient in pain, wearing an old coat with no visible money, did not receive even basic human concern from you. Patricia's face tightened, and for a moment anger flashed through the shame. You came in pretending to be someone else. I came in as someone else would have been forced to come in, Evelyn replied, without protection. Patricia looked down. You do not know what that emergency room is like every night. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. My mother died in one. The words changed the room more than shouting could have. Patricia's gaze lifted. Evelyn continued, her voice steady but carrying something older than anger. She waited because someone decided her insurance made her less urgent. She apologized for needing help because people like you made her feel expensive before they made her feel sick. I built this foundation because I was tired of watching poor people beg institutions to believe their pain. Last night, you gave me my mother's last room all over again. Patricia's lips parted, but no defense came. Can you forgive me? She asked finally, not as a nurse speaking to a patient, but as a frightened woman speaking to the person who now held the future she had assumed was secure. Evelyn was silent for several seconds. Forgiveness is personal, she said. Accountability is structural. You may ask me for one. You will still face the other. The meeting ended there. Patricia left without the relief she had come seeking. Later that evening, Evelyn met Maya in a quiet office near the pediatric wing. Maya entered as if she expected punishment to be hiding behind gratitude. Dr. Monroe, I am sorry I did not do more, she said before Evelyn could speak. I should have taken your vitals anyway. I should have called a doctor. I should have gone after you. Evelyn gestured for her to sit. You were threatened by someone with power over your career. Fear is not failure. Staying silent afterward would have been. Maya's eyes filled. I thought sending the report might end everything I worked for. It may have started the career you were meant to have, Evelyn said. She slid a folder across the table. Inside was an offer for a protected clinical ethics fellowship funded by the Monroe Foundation, along with placement in the hospital's reform task force if Maya chose to stay. Maya stared at the pages, unable to speak. Do not mistake this for a reward without responsibility, Evelyn said gently. You told the truth once. The harder work is helping build a system where the next person does not have to risk everything to do the same. By Nightfall Street, Catherine released a second statement, this one written with Evelyn's direct involvement. It confirmed Patricia's suspension, the opening of a 5-year complaint review, new whistleblower protections, and immediate emergency department policy changes requiring medical screening before financial questioning. It also announced that the Monroe Foundation would not permanently withdraw the $300 million yet, but every dollar would remain frozen until the hospital proved reform with evidence, not promises. As Evelyn left the building that night, she passed the emergency entrance where she had stood in the rain less than 24 hours earlier. The glass doors opened for an elderly man being helped inside by his daughter. This time a nurse stepped forward with a wheelchair before anyone asked about insurance. Evelyn paused long enough to watch. It was not enough. Not yet. But it was a beginning, and beginnings mattered when they came with memory, consequence, and one brave voice that refused to let the truth be buried. 6 months after the night Evelyn Monroe walked out of Street Catherine Medical Center in the rain, the same sliding glass doors opened to a hospital that no longer looked away from the people who entered quietly. The building itself had not changed much from the outside. The stone walls still carried the same prestigious name. The emergency entrance still glowed beneath white lights. Ambulances still pulled up with urgency. Families still rushed through the doors with fear in their eyes. And patients still arrived wearing every possible sign of life's unequal weight. Business suits, factory uniforms, winter coats with broken zippers, hospital slippers, church dresses, construction boots, and clothes too thin for the cold. But inside, something essential had shifted. A new sign stood beside the intake desk, not decorative, not hidden in legal language, but printed in clear black letters that every patient could read. Medical screening comes first. Payment discussion comes later. Every patient will be assessed with dignity. Beneath that sign, nurses moved quickly but differently. They still worked under pressure. They still faced crowded rooms, ringing phones, full beds, and impossible choices. But no one was allowed to confuse exhaustion with cruelty anymore. No one was allowed to use paperwork as a wall between pain and care. No one was allowed to ask whether a person was worth treating before asking what hurt. The independent investigation had torn open Street, Catherine's polished image, and forced the hospital to see the rot beneath its reputation. Patricia Cole had been dismissed after the review, confirmed not only the incident with Evelyn, but years of complaints from patients and staff who had been ignored, minimized, or punished for telling uncomfortable truths. Several administrators resigned when the audit revealed that emergency department leadership had quietly rewarded faster financial sorting while calling it efficiency. Richard Lawson remained CEO only after accepting strict oversight from an ethics board that included patient advocates, former nurses, community clinic leaders, and a representative from the Monroe Foundation. His apology had not saved him. His willingness to surrender authority to reform had. Evelyn had made that distinction clear. Regret does not rebuild trust, she had told him. Evidence does. Evidence came slowly. It came in new protocols requiring medical screening before insurance questions. It came in an independent complaint line operated outside the hospital chain. It came in whistleblower protections written into staff contracts. It came in monthly public reports showing wait times, complaint outcomes, language access failures, and patient satisfaction separated by income group and zip code. It came in training sessions where staff were not merely told to be kind, but shown how bias hides inside speed, tone, assumptions, and phrases that sound professional while treating poor people like interruptions. And it came through Maya Bennett, who now walked through the emergency department wearing a badge that read Clinical Ethics Fellow. She still looked young enough that some patients mistook her for a student, but the staff had learned to listen when she spoke. Maya did not act powerful. That was one reason Evelyn trusted her. She asked questions. She watched the intake desk. She noticed when a patient's voice grew smaller after being spoken to sharply. She corrected language that turned people into problems. She reminded new interns that courage did not always feel brave in the moment. Sometimes it felt like nausea, shaking hands, and pressing send before fear could stop you. On the morning the Monroe Hope Center finally opened, Maya arrived before sunrise. The atrium had been prepared again, but this time the decorations were quieter. There were no exaggerated banners pretending the hospital had always been noble. There were photographs along the walls instead, patients from neighborhood clinics, nurses from mobile care units, old images of Ruth Monroe in her housekeeping uniform, and a simple portrait of a woman who had never lived to see her daughter become powerful enough to change the room that failed her. Evelyn had insisted the center be named not after herself, but after the promise her mother never received. A small bronze plaque near the entrance read, Ruth Monroe Hope Center, funded by the Monroe Foundation, dedicated to every patient whose pain was doubted before it was heard. Evelyn stood before that plaque for a long time before the ceremony began. She wore a simple black suit, elegant but not flashy, and her expression held the stillness people had come to recognize. Alana Price approached quietly. The press is ready. Richard is waiting by the stage. Maya is with the first family. Evelyn turned. The first family? Alana nodded toward the emergency entrance. A woman in a faded purple coat stood there with a boy of about 9 holding her hand. The child wore a knit cap pulled low over his forehead, and his mother clutched a folder so tightly the papers bent at the corners. She looked frightened, in the way people look when they have practiced being turned away. Maya was beside her, speaking gently. You do not have to prove anything before we help him, Maya said. We will get him registered, but first we are going to take care of him. The mother's eyes filled. I do not have the right insurance yet, she whispered. I brought what I could. I can make payments. Maya smiled, not with pity, but with certainty. First, we take care of him. Evelyn heard the words and closed her eyes for a second. That sentence was worth more than the speeches waiting in the atrium. It was the sound of policy becoming behavior. It was the sound of a hospital remembering what its doors were for. The boy was taken in by a nurse who knelt to his height, asked his name, and told him exactly what would happen next. No one mentioned payment. No one looked at his mother's coat as if it explained his value. No one made fear do paperwork before medicine could begin. When the ceremony started, the atrium was full, but the mood was not triumphant. It was sober, watchful, almost humble. Reporters filled the back rows. Staff stood along the walls. Former patients had been invited, not as props, but as witnesses. Richard Lawson spoke briefly, and for once, he did not try to polish the hospital's failure into inspiration. He said Catherine had mistaken reputation for integrity, and that the Monroe Foundation had not saved the hospital by giving it money, but by forcing it to earn the right to use that money. Then he stepped aside. Evelyn walked to the podium, cameras lifted. The room quieted. She looked down at her prepared remarks, then folded the paper and set it aside. 6 months ago, she began, I came here as a woman in pain. I was not wearing a donor badge. I did not arrive with cameras. I did not ask to be honored. I asked to be assessed. What happened that night was not just a failure of one nurse. It was a failure of a culture that had learned to measure people before helping them. She paused, letting the words settle where excuses used to live. My mother died after waiting too long for care that should have begun with listening. For years, I thought money would be the answer. Build more clinics, fund more doctors, buy more machines. But money cannot heal a place that has forgotten the humanity of the person standing at the desk. Money can open a wing. It cannot open a heart that has been trained to close. Maya stood near the side of the stage, tears shining in her eyes. Evelyn looked toward her. This center exists because many people worked to repair what was broken. But it also exists because one young nurse refused to let the truth disappear. Maya Bennett did not have the most power in the room. She did not have the safest position. But she had a choice, and she chose the patient. Applause rose, not loud at first, then stronger, until Maya lowered her head and wiped her face with both hands. Evelyn waited until the room quieted again. Let this center be judged not by the speeches we give today, but by what happens when a tired mother arrives at midnight, when a man without insurance says his chest hurts, when an elderly woman cannot explain her symptoms quickly, when a child comes through the door and no one knows whether his family can pay. That is when we will know whether we have changed. Hours later, after the cameras left and the official photographs were finished, Evelyn walked alone through the emergency department. A nurse guided a homeless veteran toward triage. A receptionist called for an interpreter before a daughter had to beg. Maya corrected a staff member who described a patient as non-compliant before anyone had asked why the man was afraid. Small moments, Evelyn knew, but systems were built from small moments repeated until they became normal. Near the exit, she stopped where she had stood in the rain that night. She could still see Patricia's face in memory, still hear the words, "This is street. Catherine, not a shelter." Evelyn looked back at the bright hallway, at patients being seen, at staff learning new habits under the weight of old mistakes, and she whispered, "It is a hospital now." The doors opened, and a woman in a worn brown coat stepped inside, uncertain, cold, and holding one hand against her side. Before she could ask where to go, a nurse looked up and said, "Ma'am, come with me. Let us make sure you are okay." Evelyn smiled, not because the work was finished, but because it had finally begun in the place where it always should have started, with a human being seen before being judged. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever seen someone judged because they looked poor, powerless, or unimportant? Tell us what you think, because one honest voice, like Maya's, can expose a broken system and remind the world that dignity should never depend on money, status, or appearance.